A few days ago, I went out to dinner with a group of friends. There were 6 of us in total. We had planned this for weeks, and I had been really looking forward to it. It's not every day that we get to meet up like this. We all have busy lives, so this kind of gathering always feels special. We went to a nice Italian restaurant that had just opened up in town. It was one of those trendy places where you have to make a reservation weeks in advance, and we were lucky enough to get a table. The evening started off really well. The ambience was cozy, the food smelled amazing, and everyone was in a great mood. We were laughing, talking about everything that had happened since we last saw each other, work dramas, relationship stuff, random funny stories. I had a glass of wine, and I remember thinking how happy I was at that moment, surrounded by friends and good food. The waiter came over, and we ordered appetizers, main courses, and a few bottles of wine for the table. The whole evening felt like a much-needed escape from the usual daily grind. One of my friends, Sarah, was there, too. Now, let me give you a bit of backstory on Sarah. She's the type of person who's always fun to be around. She's got this outgoing personality, always cracking jokes and lighting up a room. But Sarah also has this habit, which has been bothering some of us for a while now. It's a bit of a running joke in our group that she's a little forgetful, especially when it comes to paying her share. This isn't the first time she's conveniently forgotten her wallet or had some kind of excuse when it came time to settle the bill. But honestly, I'd never been the one directly affected by it until now, so I always kind of shrug it off. Anyway, dinner went on, and we were having a blast. The food was fantastic: pasta that was perfectly cooked, pizzas with crispy crusts, and desserts that melted in your mouth. We were all pretty much stuffed by the end of the meal, and we were just lounging around, finishing the last bits of our drinks, when the bill came. It was one of those situations where they brought a single check for the whole table, and we were all trying to figure out who owed what. As soon as the bill hit the table, I noticed that Sarah got a little quiet. She was sitting directly across from me, and I could see her fiddling with her phone, looking a bit awkward. Then, just as I expected, she said, "Oh my God, you guys, I think I left my wallet at home." She had this sheepish grin on her face, and she kind of laughed as if it was something that just happened by accident. But I could feel this weird tension immediately. Everyone else went quiet for a moment. It wasn't like an uncomfortable silence, but more of that expectant pause where you could just tell people were waiting for someone to step up and offer to cover her. And I knew exactly what that felt like, that moment when everyone's eyes dart around the table, and the pressure starts building. I think we were all tired of this happening, but no one really wanted to be the one to call her out either. It's like, you don't want to ruin the night, but at the same time, it's not fair to keep picking up someone else's tab, especially when you know there's a pattern. Sarah looked over at me, and I could feel her eyes on me. There was that awkward moment where we made eye contact, and I could tell she was expecting me to step up. I felt this internal struggle for a second, like, part of me wanted to avoid the whole awkward confrontation and just pay for her. But the other part of me was honestly tired of this happening. I knew if I gave in, it would just keep enabling her to do this again. So, instead of offering to cover her, I just said, "I can't cover you, sorry." It came out more bluntly than I intended. I tried to smile a little, to soften it, but there wasn't much I could do. Her face changed instantly. She looked genuinely surprised, and not in a good way. She kind of laughed, like she was trying to brush it off, and said, "I'll pay you back tomorrow, I promise." But I still didn't feel comfortable with it. I shook my head and said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm not comfortable covering other people's expenses." And that's when the atmosphere shifted. I could feel the tension grow thick around the table. Sarah's face went red, and she looked like she didn't know what to say for a moment. Then she said, "Wow, okay, that's kind of harsh, don't you think?" She tried to keep her tone light, but there was this edge to her voice. I could tell she was embarrassed. Everyone else just kind of looked down at the bill or at their phones. No one really wanted to get involved. It was like I had just done the unthinkable, and everyone was too stunned to react. Finally, one of our friends, Matt, sighed and said, "I've got it, Sarah. Don't worry about it." He pulled out his card and covered her share. But the whole vibe was off after that. The laughter was gone, and the rest of the night felt kind of forced. We still talked a little, but you could feel that everyone was just trying to get through the rest of the evening, As we all got up to leave, Sarah barely looked at me. She said goodbye to everyone else, but she didn't say a word to me. It felt weird, like I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but I still felt bad for some reason. I don't like making people feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, I didn't want to keep pretending like what she was doing was okay. I drove home that night feeling conflicted. Part of me was relieved that I'd finally stood my ground, but another part of me was worried that I might have really damaged my friendship with Sarah. The next day, I got a text from Sarah. It wasn't long, but it was pretty pointed. She said, "Hey, I just wanted to say that I think what you did last night was really out of line. You made me look bad in front of everyone. It was only a small amount, and I said I would pay you back. I don't understand why you had to make a big deal out of it." Reading it, I could feel my stomach sink a little. I didn't know how to respond. I put my phone down for a while, trying to figure out what I wanted to say. I didn't want to fight, but I also didn't want to apologize for something I felt wasn't my fault. Later on, I replied, "I'm sorry if it made you feel embarrassed, but I just wasn't comfortable covering for you. I think it's important that everyone pays their share, and it's not fair to keep expecting others to step up." I tried to keep it as polite as possible, but I could tell she wasn't going to let it go that easily. After that, I heard from a couple of our mutual friends. Some of them were on Sarah's side, saying I could have just covered her since she promised to pay me back and it wasn't a huge deal. They felt like I made an unnecessary scene and could have just avoided the whole situation. But others actually reached out to say they understood where I was coming from. They mentioned that Sarah has done this before, and that maybe it was time someone finally said no. They admitted they'd been annoyed by it too, but didn't want to be the one to say anything. Honestly, I feel conflicted. On one hand, I know I'm not responsible for covering someone else's meal, especially when it's not the first time. I don't think it's fair to just assume someone else will take care of your bill, especially when we're all adults with our own expenses. On the other hand, I feel bad because I know I embarrassed her. I could see it in her face, and I could feel the shift in the mood. I didn't want to be the one to ruin the night, but at the same time, I also didn't want to keep enabling her behavior. It's been a few days now, and things are still awkward between us. She hasn't really spoken to me since, and I've noticed she's been a bit distant in our group chat. A few weeks passed since the incident at the Italian restaurant, and things remained awkward between me and Sarah. Our friend group had carried on with the usual jokes and conversations in our group chat, but Sarah had noticeably been less active. I tried not to overthink it sometimes. People just need time to cool off. I also figured that maybe she realized she couldn't keep doing what she had been doing, and that our friendship would find a way to move past it eventually. After some time, one of our friends suggested we have another group dinner. It wasn't a new idea. We liked getting together regularly, and it felt like enough time had passed since the last dinner debacle. Plus, I was hoping that this could be an opportunity to clear the air with Sarah. Maybe we could move past the tension, and everything could go back to normal. We chose a trendy Asian fusion place that had a great menu, a lot of vegetarian options for a couple of our friends, and amazing cocktails. This time, I told myself I wasn't going to get caught up in any awkward financial situations. I made sure to bring cash, just to be extra prepared in case we ended up having to split the bill again. As the day of the dinner approached, I was actually feeling hopeful about it. When the day finally came, we all met up at the restaurant. Sarah showed up a bit late, but she was her usual bubbly self, hugging everyone, making jokes, and acting like nothing had ever happened. Part of me felt relieved. Maybe we could just leave the weirdness behind. The night started off great. Our drinks arrived, and the conversation was flowing naturally. We laughed over ridiculous memes, caught up on each other's work lives, and just enjoyed being together. The food was fantastic, the plates were beautifully arranged, and we passed around dishes so everyone could have a taste of everything. It felt almost like old times, like we were finally getting back on track. I was even starting to feel a little guilty, thinking that maybe I had been too harsh with Sarah before. After all, she was still my friend, and we had shared so many good times together. For a while, it seemed like everything was back to normal. But then, just as the check arrived, I felt this sense of déjà vu. I noticed Sarah shifting in her seat, glancing around at everyone in a way that seemed too familiar. The server set the bill on the table, and we all started pulling out our wallets. I saw Sarah rummage through her bag, and I just knew what was coming. I felt that same tension, that same awkwardness that I had felt at the last dinner. Sarah sighed dramatically and said, "Guys, I'm really sorry, but I only have about half of what I owe for my share." She had this apologetic smile on her face, and she looked around the table. "Could someone spot me for the other half? I promise I'll pay you back tomorrow." I couldn't help it, I just felt this mix of frustration and disbelief rising up inside me. Here we were, again. And what's worse, this time she was pulling a different kind of trick, like she thought we wouldn't notice that it was the same pattern with a different flavor. Before I could say anything, Matt, the same guy who had covered her last time, spoke up. He looked right at Sarah and said, "You know, Sarah, I never got paid back from last time. You promised me you'd pay me the next day, and I never saw that money." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and I knew the situation was about to take a turn. Sarah looked a little stunned, her face flushed a bit, and she tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I thought I paid you back. I'm really sorry, Matt, I must have forgotten." She tried to keep her voice light, but there was an edge to it. And that's when I lost it, not in an angry way, but in that kind of exasperated, I can single quotes T believe this is happening way. I just started laughing. I know it probably wasn't the most appropriate reaction, but I couldn't help myself. It was just too ridiculous, the way she was acting like it was no big deal when it was so obvious that this was a habit. Through my laughter, I said, "Sarah, is this your new invention? Last time, it was the forgotten wallet, and now it's only having half the amount. What's it going to be next time?" I couldn't stop myself. I was still laughing, but I knew there was a seriousness behind my words. I was tired of the games, tired of her assuming we'd all just cover for her without a second thought. Sarah's expression changed immediately. The smile disappeared, and she looked genuinely hurt. I could see her eyes narrow, and she muttered something under her breath, something I couldn't quite catch. She stopped looking at me altogether, and I could feel the tension come flooding back into the room. I glanced around at everyone else. Most of them looked uncomfortable, staring down at their plates or at their phones. Finally, one of our friends, Jessica, sighed and said, "I'll cover it this time, Sarah. But, honestly, this is starting to get old." Jessica's words hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah didn't say anything. She just nodded and looked down, her face flushed. The rest of the dinner was awkward, to say the least. We all tried to make small talk, but it was clear that the mood had shifted completely. No one was really into it anymore, and I think we were all just ready to leave. After we paid the bill and left the restaurant, Sarah didn't say goodbye to me. She hugged a couple of our friends, thanked Jessica, and then walked off without even looking my way. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I knew she was upset, but I also felt like I couldn't keep letting her pull these stunts without saying anything. Later that night, I got a text from Sarah. It was long, and I could tell she was upset. She said, "I can't believe you made fun of me like that in front of everyone. You completely humiliated me. I thought you were my friend, but clearly, you just wanted to embarrass me. It wasn't fair, and I don't know why you had to make a scene like that." I read the message a few times, and I felt this mix of emotions: guilt, frustration, anger. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but at the same time, I know I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't the one making a scene, she was, by continually putting us in these situations. I replied, "Sarah, I didn't make fun of you. You made fun of yourself by not paying Matt back and then trying to pull another excuse tonight. You can't keep expecting everyone to pay for you, and then get mad when someone finally calls you out on it. It's not fair to us, and it's not okay." A few minutes later, I got another reply from her, and this one was even more shocking. She said, "I'm a girl. It's normal for guys or even friends to help pay for me when I'm short. It's what friends do. You're acting like it's such a big deal, but this is just how things are." I was stunned. I stared at my phone for a long time, rereading her message. I couldn't believe she actually thought that was a valid reason, that just because she was a girl, it was somehow okay for her to keep expecting us to cover for her. It felt like such an outdated, entitled mindset, and I didn't know how to respond. I ended up just saying, "Sarah, we're all adults here. It's not about being a girl or a guy. It's about taking responsibility for yourself and not assuming others will always bail you out. I hope you understand that." She didn't reply after that. After Sarah's last message, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of letting it eat at me or feeling bad, I decided to share the situation with our friend group. I took screenshots of our conversation and sent them to our group chat. I didn't add any commentary, just let the messages speak for themselves. Part of me was worried they might think I was overreacting, but honestly, I was at my wit's end and needed their perspective. To my surprise, the reaction was immediate and unanimous. Everyone started chiming in, and the responses ranged from disbelief to outright laughter. Matt, especially, was amused at Sarah's justification. He made a joke about how he hadn't realized he was signing up to be her personal sponsor. Others expressed shock at her sense of entitlement. Some of the girls in our group were particularly annoyed at her using the "I'm a girl" excuse, saying that it set a bad precedent for all of them. It was clear to everyone that Sarah had crossed a line, and no one wanted to keep being put in that situation. Despite all of this, we still genuinely missed hanging out as a group. Sarah was part of our circle, and even though her behavior was frustrating, we had been friends for a long time. So, a few weeks after the incident, we decided to plan another group dinner. It was a bit of a leap of faith, but we all hoped that maybe this time things would go more smoothly. I think, deep down, we all wanted to give Sarah a chance to redeem herself. We chose a casual diner this time, nothing too fancy, just a cozy place where we could relax and enjoy each other's company without worrying about a massive bill at the end. When we all met up, it felt like we were picking up right where we left off. Everyone was in high spirits, and the atmosphere was light and cheerful. We laughed, shared stories from the past few weeks, and just enjoyed being together. Even Sarah seemed to be in a good mood, joking around and joining in on the conversations like nothing had happened. We ordered our food: burgers, fries, milkshakes, the kind of comfort food that made it impossible not to have a good time. The conversation was non-stop, with everyone chiming in, telling funny stories, and catching up on each other's lives. It felt great, like we were finally moving past all the awkwardness and tension. For a while, I let myself believe that maybe Sarah had learned her lesson and that everything could go back to normal. Then the check arrived. The server placed the bill on the table, and we all started reaching for our wallets. I noticed Sarah hesitate for a moment, and I felt that familiar sense of dread creeping up. She sighed loudly, just like she had at the last dinner, and said, "Guys, I forgot my wallet. Someone's going to have to pay for me." But this time, something different happened. Everyone was so engrossed in their conversations, laughing and talking over each other, that they didn't even seem to hear her. I watched as Sarah's eyes darted around the table, a look of frustration growing on her face. She repeated herself, this time a little louder, "Hey, I forgot my wallet. Can someone pay for me?" Once again, no one seemed to hear her. I could see that everyone had heard her, they were just pretending not to. The conversation continued, and everyone was talking and laughing as if nothing had happened. I could see Sarah starting to get visibly annoyed. She raised her voice again, this time with a tone that was almost demanding. "I need someone to pay for me. I don't have my wallet." The entire table went quiet for a moment. Everyone looked at Sarah, and then, almost as if on cue, they all burst out laughing. It wasn't a mean-spirited laugh, but it was definitely one of those "are you serious" moments. Matt, who had been the one to cover for her before, shook his head and said, "Not this time, Sarah. You're going to have to figure it out." The look on Sarah's face was one of pure shock. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, Jessica chimed in, "Sarah, come on, we're not doing this again. You're going to have to pay for yourself." Sarah looked around the table, as if expecting someone to step in and help her, but no one said anything. Everyone just looked at her, waiting to see what she would do. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. She had it the whole time. She opened it, took out her card, and paid for her share of the bill. The entire table went silent for a moment, and then everyone burst out laughing again. It was a mix of shock and disbelief. All this time, she had her wallet, and she was just trying to pull the same stunt again. I couldn't help but laugh. It was almost comical, The way she had tried to play us, only to be caught red-handed. Jessica leaned over, still laughing, and said, "So, are you going to pay back Matt now? You promised you would, and you never did." The rest of us nodded in agreement, and I could see Sarah's face turn red. She tried to laugh it off, saying, "Come on, guys, it's not a big deal. I'm a girl, it's normal for friends to help me out sometimes." But that just made everyone laugh even harder. Matt, still smiling, said, "Sarah, it's not about being a girl, it's about keeping your word. You said you'd pay me back, and you didn't. We're all friends here, but that doesn't mean you get a free pass." Sarah looked around the table, clearly flustered. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed and pulled some cash out of her wallet. She handed it over to Matt, who took it with a smile and said, "Thank you, that's all we wanted." After that, the mood shifted back to what it had been before. Everyone was still laughing, and we all got up to leave the restaurant. As we walked out, Sarah stayed quiet for the most part, but no one was giving her a hard time anymore. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like we had finally addressed the elephant in the room, and now we could all just move on. As we left the restaurant, we all started joking about the whole situation. It was clear that no one was holding a grudge, but at the same time, we weren't going to let Sarah off the hook so easily anymore. It felt like a turning point, like maybe she had finally gotten the message. The fact that Sarah actually had her wallet with her the whole time, and was just trying to get out of paying, was almost too ridiculous to believe. But at the same time, it made perfect sense, given everything that had happened before. I don't know if Sarah will change her ways after this, but I do know that things are different now. She can't just assume that we'll cover for her without question, and she definitely can't use the "I'm a girl" excuse to get out of taking responsibility for herself. We're all adults here, and we all have our own expenses to deal with. It's not about gender, it's about fairness and respect. Am I a leader because I refused to pay for my friend and laughed at her?